Hey everyone, welcome to Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast. This podcast is all about farmers markets. Whether you're a farmers market manager, a small farmer, food maker, or artisan selling at farmers markets, you have found just the right podcast.
I'm Kat Fields-White.
And I'm Bridget Myers. We're longtime farmers market managers, educators, and consultants. Get ready to catch up on all things farmers market pros with us, because today we're celebrating our 300th episode of Tent Talk.
Today's episode of Tent Talk, the Farmers Market podcast, is supported by Vendor 101, helping small farmers and food makers launch successfully at farmers markets. You know how to farm, and you know how to bake. Let Vendor 101 make sure you know how to show a profit for all your hard work. If you're just getting ready to start your farmers market business, or if you recently started operating in markets and would like to brush up on your operations knowledge, this is the class for you. Market managers can reduce time spent answering prospective vendors' inquiries and help new farmers and vendors get off to a good start by connecting them with Vendor 101. Register today by clicking the Vendor 101 logo on the homepage at farmersmarketpros.com.
All right, everyone, welcome back to Tent Talk. Can you believe that this is our 300th weekly episode of this Farmers Market podcast?
Happy birthday to us!
Happy birthday to us.
And America.
And America. Yeah, we share a birthday week with America.
That's
so
right. There we go.
That's where we're at here. We are celebrating our listeners, our guests, and our own sort of amazing commitment to this project. Look at us committing
Look
to
at
things.
us. Every week. 300 times in a row. That's like, what is that? We're just under 6 years, right?
Yeah, this is very unlike Kat and I.
It really is, yeah.
We're very like squirrel with our projects that we do. So
One shiny thing.
But we know what? We stick with the things that work. The
That's
markets that are working, the podcast, this is working.
This is working.
Mhm.
It's working for our listeners. It's working for us. Also, we've had a series of amazing producers that have nagged us to do this once a week on time.
Let's just be very clear that
Right?
it's not just Kat and I, because if it were, as much as we want to commit to it, we definitely would not. And we would just
We would say,
stray
you know
away.
what, maybe not this week. Maybe
Yeah.
we'll get back to it next week.
We'll just skip it.
We'll just see. We've got this other thing to do, but I mean, the Tent Talk's important. We'll come back to it. But then we always have a producer that's like, okay, ladies, what time? Let's go.
Let's go. They're just showing up. I'm like, oh, they're here. I guess we have to do it now.
Yeah. In fact, we started because our former original producer
Yes.
was so excited about it, and kind of you were excited about it.
Yep.
Y'all dragged me into it.
Our dear Justine Marzoni Mead.
That's right.
Her and I, worked at the markets together. She was a vendor. I was manager. We knew each other. We were friends. And we would talk about podcasts that we were listening to. And then we were, Kat and I were teaching Vendor 101. We were starting the conference. This is after the conference. Yeah. And so
Yeah,
she
'cause
had kind of
conferences.
joined us. And I think it was definitely Justine's idea, like, oh, we should do a podcast. Like, you guys should do a podcast about farmers markets. And so they kind of tooled around. And then we had some big convincing with Kat, because Kat doesn't understand podcasts, nor does she even to this day listen to them.
Not very much. I got a couple. There's a couple I listen to, but not very consistently.
Mm-hmm.
I listen to the radio, also not very consistently, because I try to avoid
radio?
driving. Yeah. And well, that's, I think, how Justine finally said, look, you've been on the radio. You listen to don't you listen to like This American Life? She
Oh.
goes, that's a podcast, only podcasts are like that, but on your time schedule.
That's right.
Which seemed very clever, and I did like radio.
Yes, we'd like trick you into it.
That's right. It'll be fun.
What can we say? You're like
It'll
a
be fun.
toddler. We're like, you like these. You like cheese. Just eat this.
Well, I'm glad you did.
Yes, me
Because
too.
it actually has turned out to be really fun.
And look at you. You're so great at it.
I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like being on, the talking thing has never been a problem for me. The radio work was good. I've always done a lot of radio marketing for our markets and various other enterprises, so that wasn't hard. I write scripts, so putting the scripts together, not bad. I mean, they're kind of an outline, and then we just ramble, but still,
We're good at riffing.
we were good at that, yes.
We're good at that. So that was good. We were a good Three Musketeers podcast hosting team, and Justine taught herself how to produce a podcast because, of course, she did.
Yeah, we're like, oh, so we should do a podcast. Anybody know how to do that? And Justine's like, yeah, I'll figure it out.
She'll figure it out.
Thank you, YouTube.
Thank you, YouTube. Her husband is a brilliant musician and had, equipment knowledge. So I think that was a nice baseline. But Justine really figured out how to get it broadcast and posted and all those things that we still don't know.
Yeah.
So-
and we should shout out Dave Mead, too, because
yeah.
David, He was a bit of a sound engineer for his own bands and other musicians and things, so he had some ideas. I think he helped Justine get up to speed, and he wrote our theme music.
He wrote our theme song.
We still use it.
Thank you, sweet Dave.
I still want to expand that and add words and do a little sing-along.
We need lyrics.
Yeah. I'll write lyrics. Let's get a longer tune. I'll write the lyrics. We can have a sing-along at the Intense conference.
Oh, God. You always want to sing along. You always want a talent show.
It'll be fun.
One day.
One day.
All right, listeners, you got that? Get your acts
Get ready. Get
Start-
your acts ready.
Start practicing.
And a fashion show.
Oh, boy.
Okay, we're off on a tangent.
Okay.
All right. So producers, we had Justine,
Mhm.
and then Justine left and took the glitzy PR job.
She
Remember?
left us. Oh,
She
I'll never
abandoned
forget.
us. And then Adam Samaha, who worked for us at the markets,
Yep.
was a market assistant, had his own podcast where he analyzed.
Like The Simpsons or something.
Yeah, some cartoon.
Yeah.
He and a friend had a podcast and did that. So he understood what was happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, he actually, I think, changed a couple of things that made our technical stuff easier.
Yeah.
And he produced us for a while.
Yeah. Because he had like a little experience. He was producing the podcast when COVID happened.
That's right.
And so, yeah, we all had to.
We had to figure out how to adapt our recording methods to get
Mhm.
around masks since we were sitting very close to each other in a little padded room.
So, and then we introduced ourselves to Zoom. And I remember
That's
Zooming in to podcasts while I was in my room. My kids were doing school on their computers.
Yeah, that's
That was
right.
fun. We had a transition there. So Adam was kind of still doing that, but then he was laid off from the markets. And then Justine was also laid off. And that's when Justine came back. Right?
Yeah, Justine
Timeline?
came back. I think Adam left because he was laid off from his other job. And
Yeah.
I think he had some health concerns where he didn't want to be out and about.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so he
Understandable.
was isolating, as many of us were back then.
Yeah.
Justine then
Was
got laid
available.
off because of COVID
Yeah.
and came back. So it was nice to have Justine back. She took over again.
Mm-hmm.
Once again abandoned us for a glitzy
Oh
PR
my
job
gosh.
a few years later.
We are just tricked by Justine every
We
day.
are. Fool me once.
But
I'm
she
a-
did. She came back to the podcast,
She
but then
was
she
so good.
also came back to the market.
Yeah, she was
worked
great.
She worked the market during COVID. She started a mask business where
That's
because she's a
right.
seamstress, and she, I think it's when she started.
Yeah,
being a seamstress.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she sewed cloth masks.
Yeah.
Very cute ones.
Yeah, very cute.
They're awesome. Sold a
What a-
lot of those masks.
What a wild time
Yeah.
to be alive. So she was our producer, but then left last spring,
Right.
2023,
Yep,
for another glitzy.
that's right.
job.
And then we had a remote producer, Haley Pascalides, out of
Mhm.
Brooklyn.
Yep.
Yep.
Never even met Haley.
Oh, you've never
Other-
met Haley?
no,
I've
other
never met
than
Haley.
Zoom.
Actually, none of us have ever met Haley. It's
Oh.
all been online Zoom stuff, but she was awesome.
The wizard behind the
Yeah,
curtain.
she was amazing. But I will say that I think we work better with having somebody right here with us. So we ended up
in our face, knocking on the door.
Yeah. Haley could do great technical things. She wasn't close enough to us to force us to go to work. You
No.
know? She couldn't like show up at the pod and say, hey, come sit down at the mic. So we came back to a San Diego producer.
Yes, and
Yeah.
we're very, very excited and feel very lucky to have Miss Leandra with us.
We do.
And if you've been at the conference, you know Leandra. And you
Right.
saw her ball of energy. And she also did the live tent talk at the conference this year. So many of our guests at the conference got to sit down with her and do a little Q&A for the podcast live.
And Leandra actually is an experienced AV tech person.
Yes.
She isn't actually having to look at YouTube to figure out how to produce a podcast. So, that's been good.
That's been helpful.
Yeah.
Look at us climbing up with our
That's right. So
producers.
she's expanding. Our equipment's getting a little bit better.
Mhm.
She turns out to be a secret interior designer. The pod's much more attractive than it used to be.
Pod is lovely.
That's great. And she's been great at the conference because she understands AV. So she's been able to kind of integrate some of the Tent Talk podcast stuff and the conference stuff. And yeah, so it's been good. So
Yes, and that positive energy. It's
yeah,
contagious.
it's been a wonderful journey. All of our producers have been marvelous, and we're very happy with where we are now.
Yep.
So 300 episodes. Probably had a few repeats in there, spotlight episodes, but really not very much in the 300. So that means we've had a lot of guests. I mean, some of the episodes are just us.
We should count like how many are internal. We call them internal when it's just us.
Yeah.
And how many we have guests. Maybe
Yeah.
half and half.
Yeah, probably half and half. I
Mhm.
bet we've had at least 150 guests.
Yeah, we used to do a lot more guests, I feel like. And then folks were just giving us feedback that they like both, but they like it when we sit down and just talk about technical nuts and bolts things and just our experience. So we like to mix it up now, which I feel like is best for this podcast as well.
Yeah.
Have a good
Makes
mix.
a nice mix,
Yep.
for sure.
What kind of favorite episodes do you think you have? It's
Oh,
hard for me.
gosh. We actually just ran one as a spotlight that was Brent Preston.
Mm.
And I was just a huge fan of him. As we've mentioned, I'm a reader, not a podcast listener, and I was a huge fan of Brent's because he wrote a book. And
Yeah.
so I'm a big author fangirl. And so he wrote The New Farm. and he farms on the new farm. And so that was a good one for me. Charlotte Smith, right when we first started out, she's like our first or second guest, I feel like.
Yes.
Yeah, and she does consulting for farmers. She helps farmers develop a new mindset and be more profitable, and she was a really good guest. Loved her. Those are really old ones. Just lately, we had a vendor on that was hilarious. Not your Nana's.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was a great guest. That was very recent.
Yeah.
And then, the other 125 in between there, which ones were your favorites?
I can't even
If you
think of
it
them.
starts to be a blur after a while.
It
I
does.
guess we could have opened up our phones and looked at tenttalkpodcast.com to see who we had on and jog our memories. But we've had so many good ones.
We've had so many good ones. I do feel that, and sometimes I'll sit down to do a podcast and like Kat will send me a calendar appointment, or when Justine was scheduling guests and she's like, okay, we're going to talk to this person on Thursday. I'm like, all right. And I usually sit down and I don't know who this person is. So Justine and Kat are really good about finding guests and knowing a lot about what they do. And then I sit down and I just get this little fresh script. So that's kind of nice because
I do think it's nice. I'm a really compulsive researcher, so, or as Bridget and others sometimes say, stalker, but I really research people that we're going to have on the podcast, so I know about their background, and it lets me inform my questions and kind of dig deep into things that people might not know about them. Bridget, on the other hand, does not do that. But that makes her a fresh voice. She doesn't know anything about them, so she's able to discover things just by being super curious because she hasn't done all the background stuff.
Yeah, I think it's a nice balance because sometimes we'll be talking to someone and they're like, oh, yeah, well, I go do this and this. And sometimes I'll stop and say, what is your business? Explain it. And so as a listener, I think that's helpful. I listen to a lot of podcasts. And so I prefer when it's a good mix, like someone who really has a deep knowledge of whoever they're talking to or the subject, and someone who's asking some really basic questions in case I don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Like, can you define this word? Can you explain?
What does that organization do that you're
Exactly.
associated with?
Yeah, and not just make assumptions, because sometimes you just know everything about it, and so you don't think to ask or get that person to explain it.
No, I think you're a great representative for our listener that probably hasn't done all that research or stalking
Yes.
of the various guests.
You don't want to be Kat's ex-boyfriend, let me tell you, okay? Because if she's pissed, you better watch out. She will get your social security number in no time.
I just like to study.
That's
you
right.
know.
Yes.
But we do
Well,
get some really
educational.
interesting guests that have done such fascinating stuff, whether it's people who have started their businesses in interesting ways, or farmers that are doing something new, or managers that are doing some sort of niche thing within our very niche business and doing it really, really well that we've never thought of before. We've had some good managers on in terms of marketing and sponsorships and things that have been really instructive, I think.
Yeah, I think we've had Cara Mae Woolidge on a few times,
Oh,
but I think
that's
the last
right.
time we talked to her, I learned a lot. And I'm usually taking notes when we're doing the podcast when we have a guest on. And I know I just had like a full page of like little scribble notes of just things that she was doing that I was like, ooh, I should do that at my market. You know, just I love talking to guests that are in the industry that I'm in, you know, because I'm always learning from them. Like, yes, we're the farmers market pros, but like there's always so much more to learn, and just making little changes or doing something a little bit differently, or just a fresh idea, or learning from their mistakes. We've had folks come on and talk
Sure.
about stories where, you know, epic failures, and it's, you know, it's like that teaches us everything that we
Right.
need to know not to do. So
Right. for
that's
sure.
always super helpful.
Jessica Mullen and Melissa Maltese, Jessica from South Carolina and Melissa from Vancouver, Canada, both had really good tips on attracting sponsors as marketing partnerships more.
Yeah. Yes. That's always super helpful for me too. Even the things that we have, like we have a great sponsorship program, but just kind of hearing, it's like how the conference is really. I feel like this podcast is just a bunch of like little micro conferences, but it's just those little tips and tricks and tools that you get, kind of reinvigorates like energy to do certain things at your market. So I'm always learning something when we talk to somebody, and just interesting stories, folks that, you know, grew up in Hawaii and went to culinary school, and just like their stories. It's just nice to hear folks' stories. It's very sweet when, you know, our guests have gotten emotional talking about their love of cooking, or, you know, their grandmother's recipe, or maybe something tragic that happened that kind of was a pivot in their lives and helped them shift into their career at farmers markets. So
Saving the farm.
yeah.
We talked to Forrest Pritchard a long time ago.
Yeah.
He was the first person that really kind of cemented what we thought we were doing, which was helping farmers at farmers markets. He really explained how farmers markets saved their family farm,
Mhm.
you know, and that was really meaningful.
Yeah, that's always really helpful to kind of hear those stories, because this is just really meaningful work. that gal that was in Hawaii and did all that work during COVID.
Oh, and she helped veterans that had been
Yes.
injured, and they started a farm and a farmer's market that helped them kind of get back into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just very touching. I mean, around COVID, we were all kind of
We all cried on every
trauma
episode.
bonding with each other. But like we've said before, having this podcast during that time, I think was so important, not just for our listeners who have told us so many times that it was just so vital that they had like this touchstone and they could listen to people doing the same thing that they were doing, going through this same, crazy thing that was happening. But also I think for you and I and
Sure.
for Justine when she came back, we were all in the trenches and just being able to sit down, interview folks on Zoom that were doing this, talk amongst ourselves about what was happening at the market just that past Saturday or whatever was happening. That was just really, really therapeutic, I think, and helped get us all through that time.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
We're far, far away, but we're all together online here,
That's right.
listening and sharing. Putting it all together, we usually find a guest and then one of us does some research. We won't mention who. Somebody here does some research. We put together an
Not me.
outline, and that's sent out to the guest with a few suggestions on how to make their tech work a little bit better. But they tend to very much be outlines. They're not hardcore scripts, and then we sort of let the conversation take us where it goes.
I will say, speaking of riffing and kind of taking the conversation on, lately, a lot of folks that we've talked to are like, they are very surprised to learn that you and I are related. And it just makes me, so Kat's my mom, just FYI, if you're new here. And a lot of people at the conference are like, oh, because I said a big thank you at the end of the conference. I was
That
like,
was
thank
nice.
you. You're
Nobody's ever
wonderful.
done that. It's the 8th year of
Yeah.
the conference. I was very excited. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you
I
very
just
much.
felt it in my heart of hearts. And I was like, yeah, you're a great boss, all these opportunities, you're a great mom. And then a lot of people in the audience were like, huh? And so many folks came up and they're like, we listen to your podcast all the time. And we're like, wow, these two gals really get along. I'm like, oh, it just seems so like obvious. But I guess we could just be best friends.
We are.
We
We're
are
just best
best friends,
friends.
yeah.
In a weird mom-daughter best
I
friend kind of
know.
way.
We've worked together since I was a wee lass.
That's true.
So, yeah, but that's fun. But I think it makes it easier. And then Justine kind of just folded into that as like
That's
my
right, bonus
second
daughter.
sister.
Yeah.
So I think that was helpful that she could kind of, come. She was always like, oh, I'm just like too entrenched in this family.
Right. That's why she left us. It was getting creepy.
She's like, I gotta go. Or Kat stalks me. Yeah, but I
funny.
think that helps that we kind of have a banter. We don't follow a hard script.
No.
And we don't ever say like, ooh, like don't say this or like make sure we say it. We kind of just let the conversation flow. We don't really answer to anybody because this
We
is
don't.
our podcast and our business. So
It's true.
We just kind of say what we want to say and what we think the listeners would find most valuable.
I just heard somebody at a conference recently. There was a group of people that was at our table. We had a table at the Main Street Conference. And this woman was saying, oh, I've listened to their podcast for so long and they say anything they want. She goes, they're really funny and they don't pull any punches. So thank
Well,
you.
yeah.
That's true.
I think some podcasts are, they have like a producing company or they
Have
have
corporate sponsors
corporate
that
sponsors.
are touchy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't have that.
No.
We have sponsors, but they're fun.
Yeah, they're good.
They don't care what we say.
They're market people.
Yeah.
Their jobs are weird.
Yeah, exactly. So
I get it.
that helps with our riffing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Then we got to think of topics. I mean, think of 300 topics in the last 6 years, one a week. You would think after that time we would run out of things to talk about, wouldn't you?
We've kind of talked about that. I think after the first couple of years, we're like, wow, are we like wrapping this up? Like, how are we going to keep thinking of topics? And then we're like, oh, they just
easy.
keep coming.
They just keep coming.
Yeah.
So some things are seasonal and they kind of come back around again and you take a look at what are the challenges with opening this year's season or
Mhm.
what kind of technology has changed that'll make it easier to communicate with farmers this year. And so we cover that topic again. But a lot of times they're new and there's so many people in this industry that there's plenty of guests to interview.
Yeah.
So I think our own experiences as market managers is
Yeah.
really helpful.
Mhm.
I do a lot of reading.
Yeah.
So I'm constantly reading food systems information and kind of public space building information and things that's relevant. You do a lot of listening. You're on a lot of podcasts that are talking about building communities and building businesses. We cover, both of us, I think, follow a lot of kind of entrepreneur, how we built this sort of things.
Mhm.
And that's so relevant to farmers markets. And then we see things that come up on Insta topics. We'll post a funny meme and we'll get a whole bunch of comments and somebody will bring up something new that we hadn't even thought of.
Yeah.
And our private group is
Oh, yeah.
a huge source of inspiration.
Plethora of ideas. And folks will pop in there with questions like, oh, that's a really great question. Either it's something that I know the answer to or that I have to think about a little bit harder, but and then you'll see the comments on those questions and say, oh, people are really interested, or this is really relevant. Sometimes changes with EBT or grants or regulations, and, state to state kind of permits and regulations are different. We're all kind of dealing with the same thing.
Right.
So, there's so many topics, endless topics. And just being at markets, I think my staff is always bringing things up, just not as podcast topics, but just topics of conversation at the market. And those kind of have, put these great ideas in my brain about different topics we can do on the podcast, and then also just my day to day, like what's kind of relevant to me. I mean, I know we talk about like moving a market when I'm about to move the market,
right?
So those kind of things, but they help other people. So
for sure. And when our farmers have issues or our vendors have issues with something, again, let's explore this. Let's get on the podcast and talk to people who know, or just explore that question.
Yeah.
We have a funny niche audience. It is, I'm not sure who else does this because I don't listen to as many podcasts as you. Maybe you do. But I mean, we're a business to business podcast. So we do not promote the idea that farmers market shoppers should listen to Tent Talk. This is for people inside the tents. So it's for the managers, and it's for the farmers, and it's for the vendors. Obviously, we can't keep them from listening to it. I wonder how many shoppers listen to this and maybe learn something.
Yeah, I know some of my friends listen to the podcast.
They do? Yeah, some of mine do too.
Yeah.
And then we get comments from people a lot of times that's, oh, I listen to this every week and I really love it. I have nothing to do with farmers markets, but I own a small business.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of a natural extension.
Yeah, I think that's true. I kind of listen to other business podcasts. I'm trying to think of like things that I listen to where I'm not really in that industry, but I find it relevant because it's just small business talk.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess from a consumer's standpoint, if they were listening to it, it'd be sort of like reading Kitchen Confidential, but for farmers markets and without quite as much drugs and sex. Right?
Not that we're talking about anyways.
That's right.
Haven't gotten there yet.
That's right. So it's kind of an insider's viewpoint.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it can be interesting. I think if I was just a farmers market shopper, I would find some of this interesting. I don't know if I'd listen every week, but it's kind of, I'm trying to think of the things. Like I read a book called The Actor's Life by Jenna Fisher from The Office, and it was all about becoming an actor, which I have zero desire to do, and I found it fascinating.
Oh, really?
Listened to
Interesting.
the whole book.
Yeah.
Audiobook. Yeah, it was great. So I think maybe there's folks that are just kind of interested about different industries. Maybe they're listening.
Yeah, for sure. I do a lot of that. I read a lot of things about different kinds of businesses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello, consumers. Thanks for listening.
Right? We know you're out there.
There's one. Shh. Don't tell our secrets, okay?
That's right. Keep them to yourself. We have awesome sponsors.
Yes.
So the people that support Tent Talk typically are sponsors that understand that people who work in the farmers market industry need what they have, whether it's goods or services or what have you. And so they support us by being a resource partner. And so we've never really gone out and said, let's sell ads for the podcast. What we do is we have resource partners that get to exhibit at the conference, and we mention them in the newsletter, and we talk about them on Tent Talk. So they get kind of access to our audience and help us to keep making farmers markets better, keep making farmers markets grow so they have more people to sell their goods and services to. So that's kind of where our sponsors come from. We love them. They never have. We've never had a sponsor say, y'all need to tone it down. You need to not talk about your opinions. You need to act corporate. We've never had that.
No, they get it.
They get it.
They get it. This is that kind of industry.
Yeah.
And these are their
people.
We are their clients. Our listeners are their clients. This is who we are. So
yeah,
nice industry to be in, honestly.
So that's where we get the support, because it does cost a little chunk to do this.
Yeah.
This adds up actually when we have to pay a producer. We don't believe in making people do things for free, and I don't think they would anyway. But so we're paying producers. We're paying for tech. We have to pay for a lot of subscriptions to actually host the podcast online.
That's right.
There's all kinds of expenses in there. We like to think that you and I get paid.
Our hourly rate is outrageous. So this podcast costs a lot.
That's right. Outrageous in which way? I don't know.
Outrageously
it depends
high.
on the week.
Yeah.
It's outrageously high. Let's go for that. So it does cost something. So we really appreciate our resource partners that help us do this. And of course, also this podcast early on was certainly subsidized by the net income that we were getting from farmers market management and the other things that we do to make an income. So
we've invested a lot.
we have invested a lot.
Time and money.
For sure. And we'll keep doing it, though, because we think it's worth it. Every once in a while, we sit down and look at overall budgets for the year and say, well, Tent Talk, that's costing this. And there's no, it's not like you have to pay to listen to it. Podcasts are just out there. But we always come back to how important it is and how we think it does good things for us and others. So we're going to keep doing it.
Yep.
I mean, are there expansion possible? We should keep doing it, right? Our podcast still a thing?
Yes, they're still a thing.
Okay, good. Just making sure.
Everyone who listens to podcasts in the room gets a vote.
Yeah, that's right. And
Yes.
we have so many people that listen to our podcast in kitchens and on farms
Yes.
and at the gym. That's kind of a general thing. But I feel like we have so many people that listen to us in kitchens,
Yes.
getting ready for markets.
I know. They all tell us that. I love it so much. I love when our vendors say, oh, I heard your podcast and I was, making my whatever product they're going to, whether farming or making food or making their craft before they're coming to the market. I like that. So
Podcast on a tractor.
that's right.
That's right.
I mean, that's what I listen to podcasts when I'm doing laundry and when I'm driving.
Yeah, there you go.
So that's when I kind of listen to my podcasts. And I think the thing with podcasts is that, yes, it's very saturated because like everybody started podcasts and like, all the bros started their bro podcasts. But I think it's just kind of survival of the fittest. And it's just kind of like how movies are and books are. There's just a lot out there, a lot of material. And the good ones that are relevant and, serving a purpose or being inspirational, those ones just can kind of continue over the course of time. I've been listening to a lot of the same podcasts for a long time.
Yeah, it's true. The ones that I do listen to, they're this. I don't do much discovery in the podcast world, but I've got some that I've stuck with for a long time. Shout out to Kelly Corrigan. If you want to come talk to us, we're happy to chat with you.
Love Kelly Corrigan.
We do.
I love like local ones and then also like How I Built This with Guy Raz.
I like that.
Really
I
like
listen to that one.
And San Diego Magazine has great podcasts. It's all about the food industry. It's about restaurants,
Right.
which is not my industry, and that they kind of talk about that. It's for consumer and industry folks, I think. But that's really great. They do a good job. They've switched a couple co-hosts around, but they have a good group right now. So Troy and David are doing a good job there, and Jackie, they needed some female energy on that, I'll tell you. So
It was getting a little bro, wasn't it?
Getting a little bro. So that's really great, and that's kind of like a related industry.
I'd like to say that if Guy Raz is out there listening, that I think we should do an episode with him. He should come talk to us about how I built this at a farmer's market.
That's right, because he's talked to Stacy from Stacy's Pita.
That's right.
That started at farmers markets, other food businesses that started at farmers markets.
Yeah.
So
should compile them all up and we should do it together and, kind of do a thing.
Yeah.
So looking at expansion possibilities, Leandra, who is good at video, is, I think, maybe going to eventually talk us into doing some video podcasts. We're not going to say that we're going to do 300 episodes of video podcasting because I don't know if I can actually dress up that much.
If you think Kat and I can zhuzh it up that many times a year
to look good on video,
you're wrong.
Probably not. But we can do maybe some series that involve video or some maybe extra content that involves videos where, we're actually looking at some, maybe formatting some things a little bit differently. We might have some enhanced content available. I'd like to work on a book or two where we take some of our older podcasts and newer podcasts and maybe go a little bit deeper with those guests and put it into book form. For people like me that actually don't get most of their stuff from podcasts but like to read, I bet there's a lot of content on our podcast that folks who would like it have missed.
You want to have a podcast literature.
Right.
Okay.
I think it's the coming thing.
You think that's coming in the future? Okay.
I'm trend-setting here.
We're trend-setting. We're going from books to podcasts back to books. No, I think that that's great. I think that there is a lot. I mean, our podcast is, this is an educational podcast where we offer lots of tools and education and great stories. And those could
different
definitely.
people like to get their things different ways.
That's right.
Isn't there some cartoon out there about kids who discover like the funny papers in a newspaper and say, oh, look, somebody took Instagram and like printed it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I want to do.
See?
I want to take our podcast and print it out.
There's something
I'm working
for
on that.
everybody.
That's right.
That's great.
Everybody
print
has-
out our podcast.
Everybody has different learning styles.
Kat and I don't use our phone for phone calls.
That's right. There
So,
you go.
it's-
Everybody does things differently.
we are all different. But yeah, I think that's a great idea, actually.
We could start a farmers market consumer podcast.
Yeah, somebody should.
Somebody should. Yeah, we don't have time, do we? No. Somebody should start a farmers market consumer podcast
Yeah.
reminding people how best to support local farmers and vendors and buy their food.
Yeah, that could be great, actually. And just talk to vendors and shoppers and talk about what's in season. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a good, local podcast. I think
Yeah.
that could happen. So,
Actually, I think Cara May does kind of she does a radio thing.
Oh, that's
taking us
right.
back to where podcasts really came from. She does a radio thing, and Laura Avery in Santa Monica used to do that. And I think there's somebody in the Midwest that does a regular radio spot on a local radio station where they talk about their farmers market and what's in season. It's like a market report thing.
smart.
Yeah, it is smart.
Market report.
Probably more regional
Yeah.
than national. So that may be more effective to kind of stay in a certain area.
But that's good then. Plenty of people can do it. Different
Yeah.
people can do it. I know. I'm always I keep checking my podcast app to see, is anyone else doing a farmer's market podcast? And there's been like a handful over the years that have kind of started. They never last very long.
Yeah.
And some of them are like from like there have been some good ones from like vendors' point of view, which I always find really fascinating. I like listening to vendor stories.
Me too.
Because I work so closely with them. They're so ingrained in my business. We've already talked about how it's a weird like client, customer, landlord, boss kind of relationship, but I really like hearing like how do they feel about being at markets? What are some things that help them succeed? Because that will obviously help me succeed. But they just don't last that long.
Yeah,
and so,
farmers too.
Farmers.
I've listened to a couple of farm podcasts that talked about markets, and then they just kind of, I'm sure they get busy farming.
I know.
It's hard. It's hard for us.
Yeah.
I can just only imagine how hard it would be for a farmer who's got to deal with those crops every single day and animals and things to actually be churning out a podcast.
Yeah, I think people think like, oh, do you just sit down for 35 minutes?
It's not exactly it. There's a lot of
takes
prep.
a lot more time than that.
Yeah,
So,
and then
I mean,
editing and all that stuff.
Again, so surprised and proud of us for sticking with it.
Look at us.
Look at us.
Just look at us.
Just look at us. But yeah, I think it's nice to hear that people are turning to us because we've been doing it for so long and we have a good rhythm. We kind of know what we're doing and we have a good lineup of guests and topics and things like that regularly. So
yeah,
proud.
People talk to me about thinking about needing consulting, and oftentimes I say, here's the deal, there's a whole bunch of free content. Start binging on Tent Talk. That'll help you formulate the questions that you need for consulting and then get back with me. But you can cover a lot that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I love using Tent Talk as like a resource. I think I've said this before a couple of episodes ago, but when I'm kind of like declining an application from a vendor, now I'm just including a link to the application excavation podcast episode that we did because it's just you and I talking about the application process and why some applications aren't accepted.
Even if it's a great product.
Even if it's a great product and what vendors can do to find the right space for them. And so instead of typing that all out into some huge email, I guess you could write a book about it and I could send it to them in the mail or pigeon carrier or whatever, however you want to get this to people. But I say, I give my little blurb.
No, podcasts can be valuable for that kind of thing. I agree.
But I give a little blurb like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like we don't have space or we've reached capacity or we don't host, vendors in your category. And I usually link to like the farmers market list in my town and say, here's the contact information for other markets. Good luck to you. If you're curious about how the application process works or maybe why applications get denied, here's a podcast that you might be interested in. And a lot of folks have replied back and been like, hey, thank you so much. It's such a great resource. Like, I'm just brand new to this. Like, I didn't know what I was doing. And I just got my business started and I didn't really understand it. And so it's nice to give them that information. Yeah.
And sometimes you see them come back around because they actually have listened to the episode and they've gotten a better understanding of how you need to be a differentiated product and, if you're in a full category and things. And I've seen them kind of morph sometimes.
Yeah.
It's helpful.
It is helpful.
It's good to know you're helping.
What a great tool.
Yep. So lastly, thanks to all of our listeners, because obviously we would not have continued this far if people were not listening. And sometimes it's weird if you're a podcaster, you're in this little room, you're talking into this microphone. Is anybody listening?
Or you're speaking into the void.
Do you even still like me?
Do you like me? Do you like me at all?
And we can't be sure. But then we do get feedback out on the street. We hear a lot at the conference. We see people commenting on Instagram and Facebook that, hey, you have that question. Check out this episode of Tent Talk. So we know the listeners are out there. We can also do those. Well, I can't, but somebody on our team can look at those analytics and tell us that there's a lot of people downloading the podcast.
There's so many people listening, which is so
we're
great.
in some kind of crazy
bracket
on how many downloads we get and things. So yeah, we do have a ton of listeners, but it's hard to remember that. Sometimes when you're in this little box, you go, "Huh? Is there anybody? Hello,
Hello?
Are you out there?"
Or someone will say, "Oh, I heard your episode yesterday. It was so great." And I'm like,
"Which one was that?"
We batched like 6 at a time. I don't know what episode was on Monday. Remind me what I talked about. What did I say? What did I say that was so thrilling?
What did you like about it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we do thank all of our listeners that tune in, whether you are on every week, whether you let them pile up and then binge for a while, however you listen to us. Thank you for listening. What can our listeners do to help us make sure other people can listen?
Yeah, I always love it when folks share. We have a lot of people that tell us, oh, my market manager told me to listen to Tent Talk. It'd be so helpful to be, a better vendor. Or when you hire somebody new on your team, say, hey, this is like part of your training. It's like listen to these episodes on Tent Talk, which is really practical advice because then kind of saves you some time. Our listeners can definitely review us. If you leave a review on whatever podcast app you are listening on, iTunes, Spotify. If you listen on YouTube, wherever you may listen. That's always really helpful, not only because we love to see those lovely reviews, but also it kind of helps with algorithm things, and then it pops up in like suggested feeds for others. So that can be helpful for us. Share it on your, social media or in other groups that you're in. If you're in like a local group for farmers market managers, that's maybe a private group. I'd love it if you'd share a link to Tent Talk and share this resource with other people in the industry. That's helpful.
So there's lots of ways to get it out there. We actually have a kind of a new platform coming up. It'll probably be popping out there in the next month or so, where we're going to be on Substack. You'll have the opportunity to subscribe, get some kind of deeper content, very small amount of money per month that will buy us a cup of coffee or two, kind of support us a little bit financially, because it does take some money as well as effort to get this done every week. And, you can pitch in, buy us a cup of coffee once in a while. So don't have to do that, but it's another little way to support us and keep us going.
Yes, but our new episodes will stay free.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There'll always be free content. Yeah, lots of free content out there. But we really appreciate you. I hope you appreciate us, or the information that you get here. We appreciate our guests endlessly for taking their time and coming on and sharing their knowledge and experiences with us. I think it's a lot of fun. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, and cheers to 300 more episodes
of
Tent Talk.
Keep listening. Thanks for listening today, and big thanks to Vendor 101 for helping new farmers, food makers, and artisans launch at farmers markets, making market managers' lives easier, and for generating the income that let us produce 300 episodes of Tent Talk, the Farmers Market Podcast. To register, click the Vendor 101 logo on the homepage at farmersmarketpros.com. And for more information on creating a customized Vendor 101 program for your market organization, email us today at connect@farmersmarketpros.com.
Thanks for listening to Tent Talk today. Please leave us a review on your podcast app or wherever you listen to Tent Talk. Let us and others know how you're enjoying the podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode of Tent Talk. Connect with fellow farmers market folks in our private Facebook group, the Farmers Market Pros Community, and follow us on Instagram at Farmers Market Pros. Find online education and other resources at farmersmarketpros.com. Tent Talk is brought to you by Farmers Market Pros, where passion meets profit. Tent Talk is hosted by Kat Fields White and Bridget Myers and produced by Leandra Hayes, with original music by David Mead. Tune in next week for another great episode.